Last week, we went through some key Greek words that we're going to be reviewing throughout the remainder of this class and into the next two sessions that we're doing. The rest of this book, some key Greek words that we need to go over. So let's go over that list again quickly and refresh ourselves. First one was pneuma, and it means spirit. The second one, pneumatikos, spirit controlled. Third, suhe, the soul. Suhekos. If suhe meant soul, what would kos add to it? Soul controlled. Next few. Zoe, God's life. Logos, word, logic, understanding. And we're going to talk about this one today. Aletheia, truth. We talked a little bit in more detail about the components of human beings. We are a spirit, we have a soul, we live in a body, and we need to get that order straight. We need to get those three components right and the importance of those three components. The first component is the spirit. The second component is the soul. The third component is the body. They're in order of importance. The soul's in the middle. It can interact with both parts. It can interact with the spirit. It can interact with the body. It's designed as the central processing unit of the whole system to make decisions and evaluate the inputs that it receives. It is not designed to gather the inputs themselves, to make up the inputs themselves, but to receive them from either the spirit or from the body. God's plan was to commune with our spirits. Our spirit would then relay the information to the soul, the CPU of the system. The soul can also receive information from our body through the five physical senses about the physical world around us. We're going to spend most of our time talking about the soul because that's the place in which we most deviated from God's plan. That's the one that got out of control. That's the one that is messed up from God's order of things. And it is also the location of most of our problems. Not all of our problems, but most of them, and anything that's not actually a soul problem probably started as a soul problem and now it has manifested elsewhere. Does all that make sense? Okay, today, part two of the way we were. The way we were. Adam communicated freely and easily with God himself. He did not need an encyclopedia. He was tight with the God who created everything. He didn't need a Bible. He had a talking Bible. The very person who is the Bible, who wrote the Bible, he communed with daily. God shared his wisdom and logic with Adam. Not all of it, but anything that Adam needed to know. The information, I'm going to put that in quotation marks, the information came directly from Adam's spirit. I'm sorry, directly to Adam's spirit. He stored the information in his soul. He processed the information in his soul. And then whatever needed to happen with that information, the soul made that decision, and likely it got executed in some way, form, or fashion through the body. Something had to happen in the earth before the soul, its outputs would be recognized or whatever. So it is the way that more information is collected, but it's also the way that things get done. The soul tells the body what to do, how to do it. Let's start in Genesis 2:19 through 20 today. Genesis 2:19 through 20. So out of the same ground the man was made from, the eternal God sculpted every sort of animal and every kind of bird that flies up in the sky. Now, I must have missed this somewhere. I knew that he made man out of the dust of the earth, but I missed somewhere where he made the animals out of the dust of the earth. I'm glad I'm not the only one that missed it, but as I read this, it's like, oh, how did I not ever see that before? How did I not ever grab that before? That all of them came out of the dust.
Well, maybe stuff into existence. Nothing happens in that state. But I agree, I've not seen that.
So I'm going to probably need to think about that a little more and ponder that a little more. But anyway, it's there. It's not really my point today, but it's there. Then he makes all the animals. Regardless of how he made them, God makes all the animals. And then this next part is interesting. Then he brought them who? All the animals that he just made. He brought all the animals to the man and gave him, the man, the authority to name each creature as he saw fit. Whatever he decided to call it, that became its name. Thus, the man chose names for all domesticated animals, birds, and also wild beasts. But none of these creatures was a right and proper partner for Adam. I want you to think about the last time you went to the zoo. Did you know the names of all the animals when you walked through the zoo?
Almost.
Almost? Okay, good. Okay, good. Have you ever wondered how some of these animals got their names? Whether you knew their name or not, after you read the card that said, okay, in this habitat is this type of animal, and they live over in such and such place, and they eat this, and they do this, all the little description about an animal that you might not be familiar with. After you walked away from that display, could you remember the name of the animal you just saw? For a few seconds, maybe, for a few minutes? By the time you got home that day, did you remember every animal that you saw? You did? You probably did. You probably did. You used to work there, okay. My point with that is only a small sampling of all the animals that exist. And yet Adam named all the animals. Was Adam a caveman? Was he an ignoramus? I'm not going to say he was genius, but I am going to say you can look like a genius fairly easily when God himself is speaking through you about his order of design, the way that he created things, what he intended, the particular role, the particular function, the particular design for each of those animals. God had to communicate that to him, but he still gave Adam the authority to put it into motion with words.
It's kind of interesting because like he you know, how God names, God speaking to give things names or give things existence, because the words imply existence. And then I see that the sort of the parallel here is that he's giving man the authority to name things.
Correct.
And because when we name our kids, that's the name they live with.
Right.
You know, for the rest of their lives, and it means something.
And that was my next point is, no, you're good. You're good. Who has the right to name things?
Parents.
If I write a book, do any of you have the right to name my book? Not unless I give you the right to name my book. Or if I do a drawing or something that says, okay, we're going to pick the best title and y'all pick it and then I'll make the decision. But I still have the ultimate right to name my book. Why? Because it's mine. I wrote it. I made it. I created it. God is giving Adam the ability to name the animals. What's he saying there? He didn't create them. So what other component could allow you to name something? Ownership? Okay. Dominion? I was going with like responsibility. It's going to be his assignment to be responsible for the animals. Proxy for God's authority, correct. So God's entrusting a component of his creative authority to the man to be responsible for it moving forward. It is to the parts that God gave us responsibility. You're right. You're right. Yeah.
It's like, no, like he named all the animals, and it actually seemed kind of hard. I see why you capybara, but what about like the new things that scientists are discovering that hasn't even like that nobody has discovered during that time? Have they discovered that before scientists, God told them or something?
I don't know about all that. Whoever finds it is probably going to be the person that gets the opportunity to name it.
Well, I think if you think of it this way, right? I mean, that's the fact that God is giving humans dominion over the earth, and Adam himself was a man.
Right.
Naming creatures, naming plants and animals. If we discover something new of God's creation and we name it, I would think that's man's authority to give it a name. Because, you know, the thing that's being named doesn't know that it's named.
Right.
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 But so in the sense, I mean, And yeah, I think that's kind of coming back to the point there, yes. Yeah, man in general, had man, woman.
Chris, were you gonna say something?
Oh, I was just,
Power of attorney. Okay, right. Yes. Yeah. God's the ultimate authority, but he's delegating that authority to us. Let's talk about this idea of being responsible for a second. Is it fair to God to make you responsible for something without giving you the power, the authority, the resources, the intelligence, whatever, to manage it properly? Would God do that? He's not going to put you in a position of being responsible for something without giving you all the tools necessary to fulfill that responsibility adequately. So if he's made you responsible for something, you can rest assured he's already got the provision, the resources. He's already got whatever things are necessary to do that available to you to tap into, or he would have never given you the responsibility. That's a good little promise. Moving right along. Even though Adam, in this case, appears to be brilliant, appears to be genius, what you see is God flow him through him in a very tight connection, in a very tight order. God's able to easily impart his wisdom and his knowledge and his information to Adam's spirit, and then Adam's spirit dumps it to the soul processes it and takes action upon it. That's how it was meant to work. Even in the midst of all that, it was never intended for Adam to be an independent thinker. Now, we pride ourselves on being an independent thinker these days, but what are we really saying? I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure this out. It's going to be me. How messed up we've gotten this, that's even a positive character trait in most people, because God's intention was that we never have an independent thought, but that he is the source of all of our thoughts, and we direct whatever he's telling us into something useful. Yes, it would. You're exactly right. And now we take pride in doing that. Do you see how badly we've messed this up?
Well, how quickly Adam messed it up.
Or how quickly he messed it up too. But for a short period of time, and we don't know how long it was, for a period of time, it worked as it was designed to work. And what we're talking about now in this session is the problem. We've got to identify the problem. We've got to see what it was meant to be, the way we were, so what we're talking about today, what he lost, and then how to fix it back. How Jesus came to fix it back. We'll get into that a little long time later, but let's talk about God's logic for a second. You might can tell that this comes from one of our key Greek words. If I was to ask you which one would you guess it was? Logos. They're spelled very similarly. Previously, we defined logos to mean word, logic, or understanding. We have some handle on logos being the word of God. We typically don't think much about it being also the logic of God or the understanding of God. So when you refer to the word of God, could that also be, this is the logic of God? This is the understanding of God. But we typically don't think about it in those two terms. It's just his spoken, written word. But it also contains his logic and his understanding. It includes the messages, not just the words. It includes the idea, the thought behind the words, not just the words itself. Does that make sense? In the beginning of the Gospel of John and other places, the Holy Spirit referred to Jesus as the Word, Logos, of God. It might help us to think of a person as being the Word when we add the other definitions. So Jesus was the embodiment of the logic of God. Jesus was the embodiment of the understanding of God. Do those things help you put that in kind of a different context? Help you grasp, Jesus was more than just about words. He did give words, yes. But he was also in the way that he conducted himself, the way that he did things, the way that he responded to situations, the way he didn't respond to situations.
Like the nature.
The nature, right. And it contains more than just the words, but also the logic behind why he would act a certain way, and the understanding of God that would lead him to act a certain way. Just want to make that distinction. One Greek scholar defined logos as the context of God's word as God's reason or intelligence expressed in human speech. I'll say that again, God's reason or intelligence expressed in human speech. That's a pretty good definition to me of God's word. His reason or his intelligence expressed in human speech. This indicates who or what the real source of our intellect should be. The real source of our intellect should be him, not us, not so-and-so's book, not this, that, or the other thing, not this show that we watched on whatever channel. The source of our intellect should be him and him alone.
That would include the word.
That would include everything that he gives you. Now, I'm not saying he can't use a book to speak to you, but ultimately it came from him, not from that book. Unless you're reading a secular book and then, well, I learned this in such and such book. Who's getting the credit for what you learned? Who's getting the credit for what you were just exposed to? Where is the source of that information? Does it agree with the logic of God? Does it agree with the understanding of God? When Adam still functioned in the divine order, everything that went to the soul was first filtered by the Spirit of God. Was first filtered by the Spirit of God. So nothing got to his soul unless it had been previously filtered because it came from his Spirit. Now we've got that backwards. We get the idea in our soul and then we try to filter it through our spirit. Well, should I do this or shouldn't I do this? Well, if you were just getting information from a purified, filtered spirit, then going to the soul, you wouldn't have to worry about that. It would already all be in that category. It would already be in that way. Everything filtered by the Spirit of God. God would then be the origin of man's knowledge, not Adam himself. Another word for God-based knowledge in Adam's soul is truth. This is another of our key Greek words, aletheia. Aletheia. You must understand that facts are not necessarily synonymous with truth. Let's talk about that for a second. Have you come to discover that facts are not necessarily equal to truth?
Especially.
That could start a spiral discussion.
And I don't want to start that discussion. We've got plenty to go over. But just think about some situations where it was obvious that the facts did not equal truth. And unfortunately, if you don't know what real truth is, all facts to you are truth. But they're all relative to how you understand, how you perceive. Instead of it being filtered through the logic or the understanding of God, it's filtered through your own experience or your lack of experience.
Jesus said, I am the way, the truth. Yeah.
And nobody gets to the Father until you get to my truth first.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they seem to have too, to never see them pointing to God.
Right.
Because I got Iceland and that ocean for a long time. I wasn't even in class and that alerted me when truth is put up next to that, it just seems like a bunch of mind candy.
Yes, you're right. Yes.
And the whole it's just,
Yes.
those guys hypnotized the whole world for a long time. And that is, it wasn't even anything about God.
But you know what, it's funny you say that. I'm really glad you said, because I was like debating whether I should say this at the start of the class, but if you think about like the time and place in which Jesus came into the world, right? Like you think about the relative time and place where he was placed, right, in the world. I think he was put here for those specific reasons, because you know the joke today now is about like how many times a day does a man think about the Roman Empire, right? We talked about that, and like how influential the Greeks were in philosophy and thinking. Like that was like the epitome of success, you know.
Well, and what's that saying? all roads lead back to Rome.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we swallow that like it was gospel.
Exactly. Well, and my point is that Jesus, the fact that Jesus came in at that time and used such profound logic and understanding that far surpassed any of that human created, brilliant minds, right, of that era. I think it was no mistake.
But when we memorize all this stuff, it makes us feel smug.
Yes,
That's where the
Yes.
Pharisees were at.
Right.
That's pride.
yes,
Yes, right.
yes, which isn't God.
No,
You can label it however you want to, but it's not God. You're right.
It's one of those people that was very smug for a long time. And when God showed me what the spirit of that was, I felt embarrassed and ashamed. Socrates didn't die on the cross for my sins.
But you
And he
got
would
it.
not die in the start.
You got it. You understood it. You saw it. You changed as a result of it.
Years, so.
Well,
Well,
it's
see,
better than
that-
never getting
that
it.
exists. People are still into that junk. You can tell them I did it, it was nothing. Meet Jesus, that's the real thing.
Yeah.
Let's read one of Jesus' encounters about that very thing. John 8:44. Now, in the context here, if you want to look up John chapter 8, he's having a discussion with the Pharisees. Now, let's talk about the Pharisees for a second. Who were they? They were religious leaders. Did they have some facts?
Yeah.
Did they have some information? Would you consider them to be well educated in the systems and the things of their day? But yet they were spiritually foolish. They had not a clue about something spiritually, even though them above anybody else should have had a clue about something.
Walking around.
Verse 44, Jesus talking to the Pharisees. You come from your father, the devil, and you desire to do what your father wants you to do. The devil was a murderer from the beginning. He has never been truthful. And we just said they have facts. They have information, but they're from a source that has no truth in it. So is their facts and is their information truth? Can't be. The source of the information has got to be a relevant part of what the information contains. If it's just information, if it's just facts, you've got to consider the source before you ever get to, was there truth in it or not? He has never been truthful. He doesn't know what the truth is. Whenever he tells a lie, he's doing what comes naturally to him. He's a liar and the father of lies. Let's read this in a couple of different versions. You're from your father, the devil, and all you want to do is please him. Now that's really strong. These are the religious leaders of the day. You're of the devil, and all you want to do is please your father, the devil. Whoa. Can you imagine that sermon?
Well, God had told them in the part of the Torah or covenant what Jesus was gonna be like.
He did.
They knew it, they'd read it, they'd read Isaiah.
And they understood part of what he was going to be like, but they missed the fact that he was actually going to have two different roles at two different times. They missed, so they added their own interpretation to it. Go ahead.
The book, I was just looking at John 14:6.
Okay.
And it says, Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Right.
No one comes to the Father except through me.
Right. Through him being the way, with that one's obvious. You can't get to me unless you go through the way that I'm opening. But also, you can't get to me without the truth that I represent. And also, I'm the only source of life. And you can't get to the Father unless you go through all three components of who I am. And I'm the only way to get to all three of those components. You're every father of the devil, and all you want to do is please him. He was a killer from the very beginning. He couldn't stand the truth because there wasn't a shred of truth in him. When the liar speaks, he makes it up out of his lying nature and fills the world with lies. Here's another one. I'm not going to read all of it, just kind of skipping through the middle there. He's been a killer from the beginning. The devil has nothing to do with the truth. There is no truth in him. It is expected of the devil to lie, for he is a liar and the father of lies. I think about that. It is expected of the devil to lie. He can't do anything else. With that being said, why do we place so much credibility in what he tells us?
Then we say that the devil is alive and we treat God like he's
Yes, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. The devil comes up to you and you got a doctor, you got a mystery thing happening in your body, and you go to the doctor and have it checked out. The devil starts whispering in your ear, it's going to be cancer and it's going to take you out. Why do we give that a second thought? Look, Jack, you are a liar. Every time you open your mouth, you lie. So I doubt your lie. The very fact that you told me you're going to kill me means I'm going to live. Because you are a liar. Everything out of your mouth is a lie. Why don't we treat it that strongly? Why do we give him any credibility at all? Why do we give him any time at all? Why do we entertain his lies in our thinking, in our thoughts? Because we're not totally sold. We're not totally convinced on the other side of the equation and getting our information through our spirit from God himself.
And in our society, we're bombarded every day about.
Yes, with mostly lies.
Medicines to get and all that junk.
With mostly lies.
Yeah.
Great, mostly on site, what we see instead of the people God says it's already done, we
That's
already healed. And but our situation now is like, I'm still sick though, but if God says that we healed.
I heard somebody say one time, we need to get into the practice of doubting your doubts. The devil comes up to you with some saying, oh, God's not going to do it this time. I doubt that. What are you saying? I doubt that what you're telling me is true. So the opposite of what you're saying is really the truth of that matter. Because you cannot open your mouth without there being a lie in it somewhere. Go ahead.
So, what you said earlier, I thought maybe the reason why we usually listen to the devil is because sometimes we can be so caught up in things.
Yes.
that we don't notice. the
You're
devil.
exactly right.
And yeah, that's really good. I was gonna say that too, because like, do you think the Pharisees thought that they were being led by the?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. No, they thought they were doing God's work.
That is called deception.
And that's the end result of any lie is deception. The extent to which you believe the lie is a greater propensity for you to be deceived. And that's one of the things that we've got so messed up about this thing. We place so much credibility on the lie and not nearly enough credibility on what is actually the truth. One has one source, the other has another source. We've got to evaluate the source.
And I think fear played into that.
Yeah.
When Jesus was here, the Roman Empire controlled where all this happened, and they were afraid to accept Christ. They were trying to stay in good.
And
with the
they were
world.
jealous of him. They didn't want him taking their power or their glory or any of that stuff. They didn't like the crowds that he was drawing. They didn't like the fact that he had the goods. That he could do all this stuff that they had only hoped to do.
Yeah, that he was freeing minds, right?
You're-
Freeing minds.
Absolutely.
Like, you are not a slave.
By introducing truth, not by telling another lie or not by repackaging the lie that they already had.
So that's the power in and of itself, is like getting someone
Yes.
to realize that they are not a slave.
Yes, absolutely.
You're telling me I don't have to be trapped in this cage?
Right.
Like, I've actually got a key.
Sign me up for that. Yeah, exactly. At the core of his character, he's a liar. Everything he speaks originates in these lies because he's the father of lies. Back up a little bit. He cannot tolerate truth because he's void of anything true. We've got to get to the point where we realize every time he opens his mouth, there's a lie somewhere in what he just said. There's deception somewhere in what he just said. Something about what he just said is not true. Find it. Focus on the fact that that is not true and get back on the truth as quickly as you can possibly do it. You're offering the father the devil. You serve your father very well. Oh, that's even more of an insult. You're of the devil and you serve him very well. Passionately carrying out his desires. Wow. What a slap in the face. Don't you know this conversation went very well? Oh, I just love Jesus and how comforting his words are. And they left the conversation. They wanted to kill him. Can you see why? He's been a murderer right from the start. He never stood with the truth, where he's full of nothing but lies. Lying is his native tongue. He's a master of deception and the father of lies. Does the devil know some facts? Does he have some information? He knows facts. But these verses have said there's no truth in him. So can he, in the midst of facts, give you some truth? Just enough to get you deceived. But it's not truth. It's slanted, it's jaded, it's angled, it's manipulative. There's something about it that is leading you to deception, not to truth. Absolutely. Didn't the devil quote the word to Eve in the garden? Did God really say? Did the devil quote the word to Jesus during the temptations? But the word says this. Was that true? He left some parts out. He slanted it. Even if he quoted it accurately, is it true? It can't be, because there's no truth in him. He's always got an angle. He's always got a twist on what was actually intended, on God's logic and on God's understanding. There's always some sort of deviation from truth. Go ahead.
Whenever you started talking about whenever he was a serpent, he was trying to deceive Eve. That got me thinking that, yeah, it reminded me that whenever he's trying to lie, first off, sometimes he can be kind of bad. Maybe.
Bad liar. Now think about that for a second. That's really funny. You're a bad. What does that mean when we say you're a bad liar? But right. So when we're dealing with the devil, do we consider him to be a bad liar or a good liar? It could be both, right? But that's an interesting thought. I like that. It's just,
He said, if God says you can have anything out of this garden, then why did he say there is one thing that you cannot have?
there's a lot of reasons for that. We could get into it. I don't want to take the rabbit trail today. He had to give them a choice about something, is ultimately what it boils down to. It would not be fair for the rest of humanity for them to not have an option to sin. They wouldn't have to use their free will to serve him, if that were the case.
No, who would even listen?
We do it all the time. Well,
Well, I don't know that it's
go ahead.
certain men's preacher with problems.
Oh, never mind.
Okay.
It keeps coming to me that the truth will always glorify God. So if you look at the line, look at who is glorifying, and you'll be able to figure out.
That's a good point.
And what was the name of the tree? The tree was the tree of the knowledge of good and of evil. That's why we wanted it together.
And they already had all the knowledge of good they could ever have.
That's right.
So the only thing that would be attractive to them in that scenario is the knowledge of evil.
Well, and then he told them that if they would eat it.
You'd
they'd
become
be
like God.
God, yeah.
Well, they already were.
He was lying, I know, but.
They didn't even realize it.
He's a liar, like it says, always a liar.
To the extent that we receive the lies that the enemy tells us, we will end up in deception, which is a distortion of the truth. I'll say that again. To the extent that we receive the lies that he tells us, we will end up in deception, which is a distortion of the truth. Truth, or aletheia, literally means the reality that existed in the original norm, or the reality lying at the basis or essence of something. Let's go over those again briefly. The reality that existed in the original norm. Have you heard? Everything's getting back to normal. Well, is now normal equal to the normal from 2020? Is now's normal equal to the normal before 9/11? Is now's normal equal to the normal before, like, JFK? Does our concept of normal, does it like evolve? Does it change? Does God's concept of normal change? Why should ours? So if truth is, where'd my place go? The reality that existed in the original norm. So there was an original condition. There was an original state where God designed it and everything. He looked at creation. Oh, it is beautiful. It is gorgeous. It is excellent. It is marvelous. At that moment, that was the original norm. That was truth. There were certain realities that existed there. There were certain realities, if you want to call them that, that did not exist there. That was the original norm. Any deviation from that is not truth anymore. It's been distorted. It's been changed. It's been altered. Or the other definition, the reality lying at the basis or the essence of something. Aletheia is a true and a genuine reality. It's the life force behind the facts. You cannot define truth with words like reality, original, norm, and essence without recognizing that the source of that reality can only be the original creator. So you have to go back to, just a second, you have to go back to the creator to get to the place where you can use words like original, reality, essence, or truth in any equation, in any scenario. Does that make sense? If you don't go clear back to the original creation, something has gotten missed. Think about our government these days. Is our government functioning the way that our founding fathers designed it? And what are we doing about that? One path would be to go back to the original documents and figure out what they were thinking, what they meant. The other path, and the path that we seem to be on by and large, is, well, that rule is not working, so we're just going to scrap that and we're going to make up something new.
Well, and I think that's a good point too, and I don't want to political discussion, but I think it's important to know that the founding fathers were very smart people.
Yes.
They really were, and I think it goes to the point, even though they made the Constitution and Bill of Rights and all that for their place in time, but they also made them with the understanding that it meant more than
Yes.
just that. Right? So like, and so it comes back to like, what is the true essence of the intention there? What's the, like, why were they trying to give these basic liberties, basic freedoms to people? Although, like, you know, culture changes and things like that, the essence was that they're trying to give freedom back to the person,
Right.
and the power to make those decisions.
Yes.
I think that's
Yes.
kind of a similar thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yes.
Okay, what were you gonna say?
I also feel like it's like not really fair how Adam and Eve, it's like they like got told what the Satan was like to eat the apple. And I'm like, it's not really fair for the rest of us.
They had a shot and they blew it for everybody. Go for the pear, yeah. Or the banana over there in the other tree, yeah.
Just fine.
Back to the Congress idea again. If you really study that out, most of those people were God-fearing people. And they didn't get anywhere before they wrote all those rules before. I mean, it was a mess. Everybody wanted their own agenda. And Benjamin Franklin said, okay, we're going to stop here and we're going to start praying. We're going to spend some time in prayer before we move forward. And it wasn't until they did that they were able to actually come up with something. What happened during that prayer time? They got their head out of the way and they heard from their spirit how to make this happen. They based it on godly principles. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that they're endowed with from their creator with certain unalienable rights. Where did the source come for that? The creator.
Well, and I'm so happy that they took such real time and focus on creating that, because not only did they create that with that thought in mind, right? They're endowed by the creator, but they also gave flexibility to those who may not believe in that.
Absolutely.
Have different
Yes.
creeds, different religions, different whatever. They gave flexibility to that because that is a true human nature. But that also leaves, openness for that person to maybe later come to the knowledge. of
Right,
salvation, but
right.
You had to build the flexibility.
And that's one of the reasons too, that the documents are timeless. That the things that they put into those documents still work today because they weren't based upon, here's our answer for the current problems of the world. This is what God said about the situation. This is God's idea about it. It's always going to work. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world right now. God was the one that created this idea, this concept. And all we were able to do is articulate what he originally intended, and he spelled out in his word. Anyway, I don't want to take that rabbit trail, but it's a good example of what we're talking about here. Truth can be summarized as the absolute standard found in God from which all wisdom, logic, and knowledge proceed. It has always existed in God. Since God has always existed and will always exist without changing, truth never changes either. So if you're dealing with something that seems to change year after year after year, or decade after decade after decade, it's not truth. Truth is based upon a person who doesn't change. It came from a person who doesn't change. So truth can't change either, or it's not ultimately based on that person that can't change. Let's go back to Jesus confronting the Pharisees. We read verse 44. Look at verse 45. But because I speak the truth, you do not believe me, and you continue in unbelief. You're of your father the devil. You speak lies because that's the only thing that he knows. That's the only thing he understands. I speak the truth. You don't believe me because I do speak the truth. And you and your lies can't touch me and my truth. You can't defeat me and my truth. We can't interact because you're over here in this camp with lies and I'm from a truth camp, and those two, there's not a bridge between them. You can't have some of this and some of this. You can't make your own mix and match and a la carte. You can't do that. Either you're truth or you're not truth. I used the wrong hands there, but sorry. For those watching, pay attention. That's why they didn't get along with him. Because he was not going to compromise the truth to accommodate their lies. Everything I've told you is true, and you still refuse to have faith in me. So when I tell the truth, you just naturally don't believe it. Why? They're of their father, the devil, who has no truth in him. So it's not even in your nature to believe what I'm saying to you from this totally different perspective. I arrive on the scene, I tell you plain truth, and you refuse to have a thing to do with me. Yeah, I am the true prince who speaks nothing but the truth. Now think about that. I'm the true prince who speaks nothing but the truth, yet you refuse to believe and you want to do nothing with me. I'm the true prince. I'm representing a new kingdom, a new system, and that kingdom is based completely upon truth. And here I am interjecting myself into the world, giving you an opportunity, and you refuse to do it because you cannot even understand the kingdom, the truth that I'm representing to you. Before the fall of man, all that Adam had to consider was God's birth truth. There was no other input. Until the serpent showed up in that morning, there was nothing else for him to think about. All that he could consume himself with was something that God spoke to him. I heard somebody say one time, if you went up to Adam, who was brilliant, we talked about that just a moment ago, and you said, I have a headache, he would go, head ache, head ache, head ache. I don't understand. Head ache, I don't get it. And it wasn't because he wasn't smart enough to figure out what the words meant. He had no concept for what a headache was. He had no clue about what a headache was. I wish we were in that scenario. We didn't have any clue about what a headache was. Anyway, all that he had to consider was God-birth truth. The idea was this and this alone would always be available to shape humanity's perspective. That was God's intent. That his birth and base truth would be the only thing that we ever had to deal with. This becomes a critical point in our journey. Remember what Jesus said. John 8:32. Then you will experience for yourselves the truth, and the truth will free you. For if you embrace the truth, it will release true freedom in your lives. Now, I'm not talking about facts. I'm not talking about information. What is the key to freedom here?
That's the part that's really deceiving. I'm just writing this down because coming back, it's about, I've said facts are intended to document evidence of experience, but truth is not derived from the fact.
Yes, yes,
Even though, you know, that's really deceptive to think that way, especially today, because if there is no truth, then, or if facts seem relative, it just keeps becoming like people are waking up and thinking, oh, well, facts is relative. You can kind of like, well, of course, I've got facts over here that I can have that completely contradict your facts, right? So therefore, they then, people that do that will then deduce their truth from that. So they get to then say, well, if facts are relative, then truth is relative. So therefore, my
Right.
truth is my truth.
right.
And they have no basis for what real truth comes from, you know? There is
There's a
no.
lot of that happening.
Yeah, it's
That's
all,
my truth, you have your truth, that's my truth.
right, because it's a game of play, because they're searching for something that's foundational. But the problem is that foundation is relying on their own sense of self,
Right.
which is completely jaded.
Yeah.
They're looking for an excuse to do what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And live like they want.
But do you see here how truth and the degree of truth is connected to your degree of freedom?
Mhm.
So if in my head, if I've got this hodgepodge mess, I've got some truth and I've got some lies, what's my life going to look like? I've got some freedom and I've got some bondage. So the extent to which I get my mind clear and free of all the lies and move into the truth, what does that mean that's going to happen? I'm going to move from bondage and being held captive and from things not working to a place where they are working. And what was the only change that I made? I got rid of some of the junk. I got rid of some of the lies. I got rid of some of the things in my head that are not truth.
Well, and then it kind of comes back to the idea which you mentioned about the martyrs, like how much they would have to go through to be freeing their mind. The fact that, like, to them, it was almost like freedom being thrown into jail and being persecuted, and they're like, it's for the glory of God, but you can't hurt me, you know?
I'm gonna
Exactly.
follow Jesus.
Yeah, so kill me,
Yeah.
promote me. Yeah, do me a favor. Get me out of here. The degree of freedom is directly related to the volume of truth you know. Now, I didn't say the volume of facts that you know, and I didn't say the volume of information that you know. It's related to the volume of truth that you know. Now, go back to, if you want to do the biblical word, we're talking about this in the other class about know. What does that word know mean?
N-O-W or N-O-W?
N-O-W, no, K-N-O-W, K-N-O-W. It's stronger than that, though.
Yeah, well, it can be between a man and a woman.
Right. That's the best example. It's the intimacy, the act of physical intimacy between a man and a woman.
He knew her.
Like,
It-
not just to believe,
Correct.
but to actually, like,
Experience. To live it out, for that to be real to you, not just a head trip. So the amount of truth that you know, the amount of truth that you have that sort of relationship is also the degree of freedom that you're going to walk in. Freedom is only tied to truth. Look at the other side of this. Our lack of truth determines our corresponding lack of real freedom. God created Adam as the perfect being so that Adam could act like God. God's life, Zoe, and breath, Pneuma, were in Adam's spirit. In his soul was God's word, Logos, logic, and understanding, which allowed Adam to comprehend and walk according to truth, Aletheia. You see how all those things are working together and the life that it produced in Adam. How God designed that whole system to operate, how he designed that whole thing to work. And it worked perfectly for a while. With all these advantages and none of the complications, you can see that Adam did not have to strain to hear God's voice or struggle to relate to him. We often sometimes wonder, why is it so hard to hear you? Why is it so hard to find you and to be near to you? It's all this other junk that we got going on in our head. It's all these things that are distractions to us.
Hard to fast, but we are crucifying our flesh.
Right.
And that's why it's crucial to make that consistent in our lives.
Yes.
Because when we get all this junk and unnecessary stuff, I mean, it breaks those yokes and it does create that intimacy with him.
Right.
Where you do become one with him. You can hear him in the midst of chaos, in the midst of busyness, and it's easier to cut those lies and immediately just,
That's good.
it's a great.
Yes.
Yeah, because there's those books that came out that said, don't sweat the small stuff. And there was another book that said, God is the small stuff. Friday, I just felt strongly to go to this women's networking meeting, never been there before. And I knew, I was telling myself, like, my clients aren't there. This is not about going and finding business. But for some reason, I had to be at that networking meeting. And it's like God said, put this bracelet on, put these earrings on. You know, okay, why are you interested in my jewelry? Because the lady that gave me the jewelry was at that meeting. It was her first. And connect with her. It's like, God, when you're listening and trying, I would say I'm trying to listen. I'm not going to claim to always be successful, but when you're trying to listen, he's in everything. He's guiding you every way. And I fail 1,000 times over every day to listen.
And he did that for her.
The same.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Same example I have is their grandpa, so my father-in-law, John, grandpa John. What's really cool about him, and I've always admired this, is that, you know, it's almost kind of funny a little bit in a way, because he talks about how he's walking in the spirit and everything just becomes, you know, God was speaking to me, like it was just a casual conversation. And I love that, because at first you're kind of thinking, okay, here we go, you know, everything becomes a discussion, but he's a farmer. And what's really neat about that is that, you know, you learn and you listen a little bit, like how connected they are with land.
Right.
How connected they are with,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
the responsibility of cultivating crops or things that, you know, that require a lot of responsibility. Also the responsibility of killing something when it needs to be killed. You know, like it's a really heavy thing for him. And that's something I found very fascinating. Very similar way is like everything he's doing is like he's walking and God is talking to him. And you kind of think like, are you sure that was God talking to you? But like, I really think it is, because it's in the very small things, and it's just a daily part of his walk. And it's just like he can't help it, because God is speaking to him all the time and guiding, and then you see his testimony and the things that he's talked about and the decisions that he's made to have like natural farming, organic crops when it was not popular.
Yeah.
And he was not prosperous in terms of the world, but he became, you know, self-sufficient, and now they're finally getting out of debt when all their friend farmers are
Right.
struggling, you know, because he's listening to God every single step, everything he does. And I think it's the same kind of thing that you mentioned, and I admire that.
I think that's the pray without ceasing. It doesn't mean go get on your knees
Right.
and never get up. It just means always be open to know that your father wants to talk to you and listen.
And make the decision to not be led by what I'm thinking about.
Right, right.
My agenda, my task list, my to-do list, my priorities, my whatever plan for the day. We've got to get past, this thing is in charge. No. God, I give you my day. You know what I need to accomplish today? I give you my day. Show me how to do it. Show me when to do it. Show me if I've even got the right stuff on the list.
I saw it, through him and Dad. I didn't listen because I wasn't 100%. I just heard him say, do not spend the whole $40 away. I did anyway, but then I realized why I did, because my tank didn't need to get filled up. And it was funny to me, because I'm like, I heard you say that, don't spend the whole $40. But like you said, in everything. So it doesn't even matter what it is, we are too busy looking for big major moments instead of just thinking, like you said, in the small stuff, of just simple that,
What earrings?
yeah, and we probably ask.
I've said this before, it's something that I'll probably continue to say. We sometimes confuse the spiritual with the spectacular. Or the supernatural with the spectacular. We think that for something to be God or for something to be spiritual in nature, it's got to just be, oh, wow. Oh, did you see that? And we miss so many times what God is actually doing, what he's actually saying, because it's not a presentation. It doesn't have lights and bells and whistles with it. Or he can't be bothered with it. He's busy running the universe, and surely he's got better things to do than tell me not to spend all $40 on my gas tank. There are bigger priorities that he's probably dealing with. Right.
Because God can measure the universe by the breadth of his hand. He is able to think of all things all the time.
So we can see that Adam's relationship with God is probably different than most of ours. He didn't have to work at it. It kind of flowed because there was nothing else competing for his attention. There was no distractions at that point. There was nothing else there. So it was the natural course of things for him to walk that way. God's Spirit led him on the inside, and the soul perfectly related to the world around him. Adam was spirit controlled. His soul carried out the bidding of his spirit through the mechanism of his body. You can see how Adam was a spiritual man, or a pneumatikos. Pneumatikos, spirit controlled for a time. 1 Corinthians 2:13, this idea of being spirit controlled. We also speak these things, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, explaining spiritual things to spiritual people. Spiritual things is pneumatikos. Spiritual people is also pneumatikos. Both of them use the same word. But you have to have a special language. You have to have a special way to present spiritual things to spiritual people. If you try to do it just happenstance, it's probably not going to work well. Something's going to get missed. Something's going to get distorted. And you can't speak of spiritual things to all sorts of people, because that's going to get all kinds of crazy. They're not going to have the understanding necessary to do what is needed to relate to what you're talking about. But when you get to the point where you can speak spiritual things to spiritual people, then you can really make some progress. We also speak of these things not in words taught or supplied by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, combining and interpreting spiritual thoughts with spiritual words for those being guided by the Holy Spirit. So if you want to be one of these people that are in this camp, you have to be guided by the Holy Spirit, not guided by your own desires, your own thoughts, your own feelings. One more of these. We do not speak of these gifts of God in words shaped by human wisdom. We speak in words crafted by the Spirit, because of our collective judgment on spiritual matters is accessible to those who have the Spirit. Our collective judgment on spiritual matters. What's that talking about? It's kind of one mind, but where is that mind at? What is that mind? It's God's Spirit that's now resident in each of us. And that Spirit doesn't change. That Spirit doesn't alter. So when I can tap into that same Spirit, and they can tap, I want to say the cloud, but I don't want to get the cloud in our mind. I can log into the Spirit and get my stuff. Log into the same Spirit and get stuff. You got a collective going on that you didn't create.
That's the same dynamic in like spiritual healing on first surface, right? Like you feel that, it's not just some like wishy-washy, but you feel some impression of the Spirit when somebody's praying something, and then you're like, holy cow, I have that same word.
Yes.
Whatever. Right?
Yes.
you know, it's not always, but sometimes, I mean, it's very palpable and it's not just coincidence, you know?
Right.
You're like, I can't explain this, you know, sense of connection away because the spirit is moving in common, even though we're different people. We didn't meet beforehand, right? It's just, there is an essence of the spirit that's there that we know when we tapped in. And I think that's what's really cool when we do those outreach, prayers or healing, go out and do the healing thing, because we're all kind of operating in the spirit.
Now, I want to read this same verse in a little more context. This is 13 through 15, not just 13. We articulate these realities. They have adopted this whole new idea of what reality is supposed to be. Reality is not what I can see. Reality is this truth stuff that started, that was the original source of these things. We articulate these realities with words imparted to us by the Spirit and not with words taught by human wisdom. We join together Spirit-revealed truth with Spirit-revealed words. Someone living on an entirely human level rejects the revelations of God's Spirit, for they make no sense to him. He can't understand the revelations of the Spirit because they're only discovered by the illumination of the Spirit. Those who live in the Spirit are able to carefully evaluate all things, and they are subject to the scrutiny of no one but God. So here we are trying to relate to these unspiritual people, and we're trying to tell them things that they can't possibly understand. So instead of fighting that battle, instead of trying to figure that out, we just say, well, flew with it. I'm just going to water it down so that I'm on your level, and now I'm missing that ultimate connection that I needed, just because it's more comfortable for me.
Well, it's really hard to do. It's hard to balance that and to know. You have to really know that.
Right. How do we typically define a spiritual person? This is the part where you talk. How do we define a spiritual person? What's your definition of a spiritual person? Yeah, go ahead.
Of the spiritual person is someone who, first off, takes responsibility for others sometimes.
Wow.
Second off, for being nice. and
Okay.
Listening to God and not going in the way that you planned, but going
Okay.
in the direction that God planned for you.
Good answer. I'm impressed. Good answer. Okay, how else? How would someone else define a spiritual person?
Secular world, we're weirdos.
We're weirdos, okay? We need to print that shirt. I'm a weirdo. I wear it proudly. I'm a strange and peculiar person. Ask me about it. Ultimately, that's the correct answer. Ultimately, that is the right answer. That is how we're supposed to define a spiritual person. That is not how we typically define a spiritual person.
And unfortunately, what's sad is that by today's standards, you know, people that are quote unquote educated or above it will look at someone who's spiritual and think that they're just uninformed and, you know, silly.
Ignorant.
Right, ignorant. And
Using it as a crutch, using it as a
Yeah,
Right,
coping mechanism.
right. It's completely backwards.
if they only knew.
And that's where the healing class comes back in, is if they look at us and we have a power that they can only aspire to, if we're connected to the power, the true power, then we have something that attracts them to us. So they may call us weirdos, but they'll want what we have. If we're living just like them, they have no reason to follow us.
You're right.
Kind of like the fact that like, how can your mind be so still? And that's a power in itself, you know?
So however you would go about defining a spiritual person, and we talked about the right answer being someone that is spirit controlled, but that's not where most people are at. Most people don't go there with their definition of a spiritual person. So your definition of spiritual person, whatever that includes, my question then would be, how much truth is associated with that definition? Or how much of it, how many parts of it were added by your soul over the course of time? By the way you saw things, by the way that you appeared things, by how often they smile. I mean, you can add all sorts of things to this spiritual person definition thing. But my point is, most of that is not really based in truth. It got added somewhere along the way. So our concept then, if it has lies in it, it's also not going to be a completely freedom-based concept. There's going to be some bondage in whatever that spiritual person definition results in. If the world does that to a certain extent, let me rephrase this. If we do that inside the church, how much worse is it in the world who has no other mechanism for the definition of a spiritual person? You get all kinds of stupid stuff in their definition of a spiritual person. So we try to accommodate, okay, you've defined a spiritual person this way. They got to do this, this, and this, and not do this, and this. Fill in the blanks. We try to force ourselves to be that for them so that in their eyes, we're spiritual people, and we still miss the whole definition. We still miss the whole truth of it. So we're technically in bondage to their definition rather than to the actual point of being a spiritual person. Go ahead.
And that made me think sometimes you want to be a leader, not a follower, unless that leader, you can be a follower to a good leader, like you can be a leader of God, but you can be a follower of God and listen to his definition
Right.
instead of listening to a bad leader and then trying to follow them.
You're right. You're very good. You're pretty sharp for someone your age. You're very insightful.
Yeah,
That's one.
to go to school.
What a perfect setup God gave to Adam and Eve. God was intertwined with Adam and Eve. Their spirits easily connected to God and his voice. Because their souls distinctly and effortlessly heard the communication from the Spirit, they walked in perfect peace and perfect contentment. Everything was in perfect balance. And then, tune in next week.